She slept facing the wall, seeking distance. The Apache changed that instantly. She moved to the city with high hopes, carrying her career dreams in one hand and the quiet weight of past heartbreaks in the other. It was her first real step away from her small hometown, where everyone knew your name and your mistakes, and while she longed for freedom, she also carried a quiet loneliness she couldn't quite shake. The city was alive with people, noise, and opportunity, yet she often felt invisible among the crowd, a silent observer in her own life. Her apartment, a small but neat space on the fourth floor of a faded brick building, reflected her inner world. Everything had its place and she liked it that way. The furniture was simple, mostly functional, and while the walls were bare, they gave her a sense of control. When night fell, Maya had a habit that symbolized her emotional state. She slept facing the wall. It wasn't just a quirk, it was a protective measure. Facing away from the room and away from the window made her feel less exposed. She could pretend that the world outside didn't exist, that the events of the day didn't matter. It was her way of creating a safe bubble, one that no one could penetrate. Work was her main distraction, a necessary routine that kept her mind occupied. She worked as a junior designer at a small firm downtown, and while her colleagues were friendly, she never fully let anyone in. Small talk was fine, but personal conversations made her anxious. She often declined invitations to after-work gatherings, choosing instead to retreat to her apartment and immerse herself in books or music. Social media felt like a window into a world she wasn't ready to join, filled with laughter and connections she felt incapable of sustaining. Even her weekends were solitary. She wandered through quiet parks, observed people from the benches, or took long walks through empty streets just to feel the city breathe. The cafes she visited were usually empty, or if crowded, she chose corners where she could remain unseen. Her meals were often simple, eaten quickly and alone without conversation or distraction. While some people might have called her life lonely, she had convinced herself it was peaceful. Yet deep down, there was a hollow space she could not fill. Maya's thoughts often wandered to her past. The breakup that had scarred her was not recent, but it lingered in her mind like an unhealed wound. She had given her heart fully, only to have it returned broken. Trust, she realized, was fragile, and once shattered, it could take years to rebuild. That experience had taught her caution, had taught her to guard herself at all times. Even small gestures of kindness or familiarity from strangers were met with suspicion. She told herself it was self-preservation, but sometimes she wondered if it was fear masquerading as wisdom. Her nights were the hardest. The darkness of her apartment mirrored the darkness she felt inside, and lying in bed facing the wall became both a ritual and a shield. She imagined that by turning away from the room, she was turning away from potential disappointment, from the unpredictable nature of life. The walls absorbed her fears and her anxieties, holding them at a safe distance. Sometimes she would drift off imagining stories of distant lands, of people who lived boldly and without fear, and she would marvel at their courage while silently wishing she could be like them. On one particular evening, after a long day of work that had left her exhausted but restless, Maya prepared her apartment for the night. She made a cup of tea, feeling the warmth spread through her fingers and up into her chest. It was a small comfort, one she clung to in moments of solitude. She sat by the window for a few minutes, looking out at the city lights that flickered like distant stars. Each light represented a life, a story, and yet she felt disconnected from all of them. She finished her tea, washed the cup, and set it carefully on the counter. When she finally lay down in bed, facing the wall as always, a sigh escaped her lips. It was a sigh of both exhaustion and resignation. Her mind replayed small events of the day, the minor successes, the unnoticed efforts, the fleeting moments of interaction that had left her anxious instead of joyful. She hugged her pillow tightly, a small gesture of comfort, and closed her eyes. Sleep came slowly, as it always did, and when it finally arrived, it brought with it a fragile peace. The next morning, the routine repeated itself. Maya awoke to the soft light filtering through her curtains, casting a gentle glow across her room. She dressed quickly, ate a light breakfast, and stepped out into the city that buzzed with life. The streets were crowded with people rushing to their destinations, cars honking, buses arriving and leaving. Yet, amid all this activity, Maya felt invisible. She moved through the world carefully, avoiding eye contact when she could, keeping her thoughts to herself. Over the following days, this rhythm continued. Work, solitude, brief interactions with neighbors or colleagues, and nights spent facing the wall. Maya's life was orderly, predictable, and safe, yet the monotony weighed on her. She longed for something different, something unexpected to break the cycle, yet she feared change. The comfort of isolation, as suffocating as it was, felt easier than risking disappointment or betrayal. Then there was the building itself, a quiet collection of apartments and tenants who mostly minded their own business. Among them lived an older man, known to some as Apache. He was a presence in the building that could not be ignored. People described him as blunt but kind, someone who had seen much in life, and had a way of speaking truth without cruelty. He had lived there for years, tending to small repairs, helping neighbors when needed, and observing the comings and goings with a watchful eye. Maya had noticed him before, of course. How could she not? His laughter sometimes carried down the hallways, rich and unrestrained, a sound that made her pause in surprise. He moved with confidence, yet there was gentleness in his actions, a balance that intrigued her. But she never spoke to him, never allowed herself to cross that invisible boundary she had drawn around her life. Interaction, she had learned, could lead to vulnerability. One evening, as Maya returned from work, she noticed Apache struggling with a heavy box outside the building's entrance. His face was focused, and there was a determined energy in his movements. Something inside her stirred, a mixture of curiosity and caution. Against her instinct to ignore him, she paused. "Do you need a hand?" she asked quietly. Apache looked up, surprised, and then smiled warmly. "Ah, finally," he said, his voice deep and steady. "I was wondering when someone would offer." He gestured to the box, and Maya moved closer, feeling the awkwardness of the interaction. It was brief, practical, yet something shifted in that moment. A small connection had been made, one that neither of them could yet define. After helping him place the box inside, they exchanged a few words. Apache noticed her careful, measured movements, the way she avoided eye contact. He made a light-hearted comment about it, teasing gently. Maya felt a mix of irritation and amusement. She didn't respond immediately, but inside she recognized the truth in his words. She had been hiding, not just from the world but from herself. That night, lying in her apartment, facing the wall as always, Maya replayed the encounter in her mind. There was something unsettling and yet intriguing about Apache's presence. He was different from anyone she had met, direct, observant, unafraid of reality, and yet capable of warmth. She didn't understand why it affected her, but it did. The familiar comfort of her wall-facing sleep felt slightly less secure, as if the world had nudged her gently, asking her to notice it. And for the first time in a long while, Maya wondered what it would be like to turn around, to face the room, to face the possibilities she had been avoiding. Sleep came slowly that night, as it always did, but her thoughts were different. There was a flicker of curiosity, a tiny spark of willingness to see what might happen if she let someone in, even just a little. For Maya, the world remained vast, unpredictable, and at times frightening. But the encounter with Apache planted a seed, a quiet promise that perhaps life could be more than routine, more than distance and safety. And while she still faced the wall as she drifted off, the wall no longer felt like a shield. It was simply part of the room now, a silent witness to a life that might, slowly and cautiously, begin to change. The next few days passed with a strange sense of anticipation for Maya. Her life continued in the same predictable rhythm: work, solitude, brief interactions. But now, Apache's presence lingered in her mind like a shadow she couldn't ignore. She hadn't expected their encounter to leave such an impression. His calm confidence and gentle humor had unsettled her in the best possible way. She found herself noticing details she had ignored before: the way he smiled easily, the way he seemed to understand people without trying too hard, the small acts of kindness he performed without any expectation of recognition. It started with small gestures. Apache would wave at her from the stairwell when he saw her returning from work. At first, Maya merely nodded or smiled faintly, unsure of how to respond. But over time, the gestures began to feel less awkward and more comforting. There was an unspoken understanding that he wasn't intrusive. He wasn't trying to force friendship. He simply acknowledged her presence in the building, something she had grown unused to. For someone who had spent years retreating into herself, these tiny gestures carried unexpected weight. One evening, as she was walking home under the dim streetlights, she noticed Apache standing near the entrance, tending to a small garden of potted plants. The sight was unusual. Most people ignored the drab corners of the building, letting weeds grow where they would. But Apache crouched carefully, trimming leaves and adjusting pots. His attention to detail was calming to watch. She paused at a distance, unsure if she should speak. "Careful there," he called softly, noticing her hesitation. "Come on, give me a hand." Maya hesitated. Helping him meant stepping into a small, unspoken world of connection she wasn't accustomed to. But something inside her nudged her forward, a quiet curiosity she hadn't felt in years. She moved closer and knelt beside him, mimicking his careful movements as he guided her. For a few minutes, they worked together in silence, the only sounds being the occasional rustle of leaves and the faint hum of the city beyond the walls. It was during these quiet moments that Maya began to notice subtle lessons in Apache's approach to life. He didn't lecture or preach. He simply acted with intention. He treated the plants with respect, tended to small problems without fuss, and occasionally offered a remark that made her think in ways she hadn't before. "Life isn't always grand," he said one evening, adjusting a pot so it caught the streetlight just right. "Sometimes it's small, quiet, and steady. That's where strength grows." Maya listened, intrigued, even as she tried to hide her curiosity. She wasn't used to someone speaking in such simple truths without judgment. Most people either ignored her or asked questions she didn't want to answer. Apache's words weren't demanding. They invited reflection. She realized that his presence wasn't threatening her boundaries. It was gently challenging her walls, one tiny act at a time. As the days passed, she found herself looking forward to these brief encounters. Even small interactions, like passing him in the hallway, began to feel significant. He would greet her warmly, ask simple questions about her day, and share small anecdotes from his own life. There was a rhythm to his presence that contrasted sharply with the isolation she had grown accustomed to. She was drawn to it, even as she fought against the vulnerability it stirred within her. One evening, Apache invited her to join him on the roof of the building. It was an unusual request, but his tone was casual, almost matter-of-fact. "The view's better at sunset," he said with a smile. "You should see it sometime." Maya hesitated, glancing at her apartment door as if weighing the comfort of routine against the unfamiliarity of participation. Something inside her, a quiet spark of curiosity, urged her to accept. "Maybe tomorrow," she said, though the words felt heavier than usual. The invitation lingered in her mind, like a gentle challenge she couldn't ignore. That night, lying in bed facing the wall as she always did, Maya's thoughts wandered to Apache. She remembered the way he had guided her hands among the plants, the ease with which he spoke, and the quiet wisdom in his words. Sleep came slowly, as always, but for the first time in weeks, her thoughts weren't filled with fear or regret. Instead, they carried a tentative hope, a recognition that perhaps connection didn't have to be painful or dangerous. The next day, Maya returned home from work to find Apache on the roof, adjusting a small telescope he had set up. "Come on up," he called, smiling. "You don't have to bring anything but your curiosity." For a moment, Maya froze. The roof was open, exposed, and she had never been comfortable in such unguarded spaces. Yet something about his presence reassured her. Carefully, she climbed the narrow staircase, her heart racing with a mix of anxiety and excitement. The city stretched out before her, a mosaic of lights, rooftops, and distant sounds. Apache stood beside the telescope, pointing to the constellations beginning to appear in the early evening sky. "It's peaceful up here," he said, "far from the noise, but close enough to remember you're not alone." Maya found herself drawn into the moment. She gazed at the stars, feeling a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in years. For the first time in a long while, she felt that she could be present without fear, that she could exist in a space without retreating into herself. Apache didn't push her to speak or reveal anything. He simply shared the space, allowing her to be. Over the next few weeks, Maya began to notice subtle changes in herself. She smiled more easily, though quietly. She took small risks, like greeting neighbors she had ignored before or pausing to watch a sunset rather than rushing past it. The routine that had once defined her life, the strict schedule, the careful avoidance of vulnerability, was beginning to loosen, replaced by small moments of connection and awareness. Apache continued to guide her in these quiet ways. He shared stories of his past, of mistakes he had made, lessons he had learned, all without preaching. He encouraged her to notice beauty in small things. A plant growing through a crack in the sidewalk, the laughter of children playing in the street, the way light filtered through her apartment window in the morning. These moments seemed insignificant at first, but Maya began to realize that they were shaping her perspective, teaching her that life could be rich even in its quiet, ordinary moments. One evening, as they sat on the roof watching the sun dip below the horizon, Apache made a gentle observation. "You've been hiding from the world, haven't you?" he asked quietly. Maya's heart skipped a beat. It was a simple question, but it pierced her carefully constructed defenses. She nodded, almost imperceptibly, unsure if she wanted to admit it. "You don't have to face it all at once," he said, sensing her hesitation. "Just notice it. Take small steps." That's how courage grows, not in leaps, but in quiet persistence. His words stayed with her long after she returned to her apartment. That night, lying in bed, facing the wall as usual, she felt a shift. The wall no longer felt like a complete shield. It was still her comfort, her familiar boundary, but there was a crack, a small opening that let in light, curiosity, and a tentative sense of possibility. For the first time, she imagined what it might feel like to turn around, to face the room, to face life in a way she had avoided for so long. Maya didn't make any sudden changes. She didn't abandon her habits overnight, nor did she transform instantly. But the rhythm of her days began to include moments of reflection, small interactions, and gentle curiosity. Apache's presence, consistent yet non-intrusive, became a quiet anchor in her life, showing her that connection didn't have to be overwhelming or frightening. By the end of the month, she noticed that she looked forward to seeing him, even if just for a brief conversation in the hallway or a shared smile on the roof. These interactions reminded her that life was more than routine, more than distance and isolation. They reminded her that she had the capacity to engage, to feel, and to grow. And while she still sometimes slept facing the wall, she did so with a new awareness. The wall was no longer a prison. It was simply part of her world, a familiar presence in a life that was slowly expanding beyond its boundaries. Apache had not forced her to change, nor had he rushed her. He had simply shown her, quietly and consistently, that life could be approached with curiosity, courage, and gentle care. Maya's journey toward openness and connection was only beginning, but for the first time in a long time, she felt that it was possible. The city no longer seemed indifferent, the night no longer seemed lonely, and the wall she faced at night no longer felt like an unbreachable barrier. Something was shifting inside her, subtly but profoundly. And Maya, despite herself, began to feel a quiet excitement for the days to come. As the days passed, Maya found that her thoughts were increasingly drawn to Apache. She noticed details about him that she hadn't paid attention to before. The gentle way he spoke to the building's janitor, the patience he showed while teaching children in the small courtyard to care for plants, and the way he seemed to genuinely listen to people without ever interrupting or judging. It was strange for Maya to realize how much she admired someone she barely knew. She had spent so long hiding from people, convinced that connecting with others only led to pain, that she wasn't sure what to do with these new feelings of curiosity and warmth. One afternoon, Apache knocked gently on her door. "Mind if I come in?" he asked. There was no hint of intrusion in his voice, only a quiet, easy confidence that made it difficult to refuse. Maya hesitated for a moment, her usual instinct to retreat rising to the surface. But then she thought of the tiny seed of courage she had felt on the rooftop, and she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. Inside, the apartment felt different with another person present. Normally, Maya liked her space to be entirely under her control. The room was orderly, predictable, and quiet, reflecting her inner world. Having someone else there, even someone she trusted, was unsettling. But Apache moved naturally, careful not to disrupt anything. He noticed her collection of books stacked neatly on the shelves and commented on a novel he had read long ago. It was a simple remark, but it sparked a conversation that lasted for hours. They spoke about literature, life in the city, and small, everyday observations. For Maya, this conversation was a revelation. She realized how long it had been since she had shared her thoughts so freely, without the shadow of fear or judgment hanging over her words. She felt her walls, which had been so rigid for so long, begin to soften. There was a comfort in talking to someone who listened without trying to fix her, someone who offered understanding rather than advice. She laughed more freely than she had in months, and when Apache finally left, she felt a strange emptiness, a sense of loss for the first time in a long while. After that day, their interactions became more frequent, though still subtle. Apache would knock on her door with small requests for help, moving a plant, holding a ladder, or offering a perspective on a problem he was thinking through. Each visit was brief and practical, but over time, Maya noticed how these moments began to shape her life. She was no longer just existing. She was participating, even if in small ways. Her apartment, once a sanctuary of solitude, now felt like a space of possibility, where connections could exist without fear or pressure. One evening, Apache invited her to join him for a walk through the quiet streets of the city. Maya hesitated, the familiar desire to retreat rising in her chest, but something in Apache's calm demeanor reassured her. She agreed, and as they walked, the city felt different, less intimidating, less lonely. They spoke about simple things, the patterns of leaves on the trees, the distant hum of traffic, the changing colors of the sky at sunset. There was a rhythm to their conversation, an easy flow that Maya had forgotten existed in human interaction. It was during this walk that Maya began to notice subtle changes in herself. She smiled at strangers without immediately turning away. She lingered a little longer at shop windows just to observe life, and she found herself listening to the stories of people they passed. Small moments of human connection, which had once seemed overwhelming or exhausting, now felt enriching. Apache didn't push her beyond her comfort zone. He simply walked beside her, showing that life could be experienced gently, without fear or expectation. As weeks went by, Maya started to open up about her past in small, careful ways. She shared fragments of her childhood, her experiences with friendship, and the heartbreak that had made her retreat from the world. Apache listened patiently, never interrupting or judging. His presence provided a safe space where vulnerability didn't feel dangerous. For the first time in years, Maya realized that sharing didn't always lead to pain. Sometimes, it could lead to understanding and connection. One rainy evening, they found themselves sheltering under the awning of a small shop. The city was quiet, the rain soft against the pavement. Apache spoke about his own experiences with isolation, how he had learned to find peace in solitude, but also to recognize the importance of connection. Being alone isn't the same as being lonely, he said. You can be alone and still feel full. But when you're lonely, even the smallest connection can feel like sunlight. Maya listened intently, absorbing his words. She realized that for so long she had equated solitude with safety, believing that emotional distance protected her from harm. But Apache's words made her question that assumption. She saw now that hiding from the world had also hidden her from herself, keeping her from experiencing life fully. She began to understand that courage wasn't about grand gestures. It was about small, consistent acts of presence, trust, and openness. Encouraged by this realization, Maya began to make small changes in her daily life. She smiled at her neighbors when she passed them in the hallway. She lingered a little longer in the park to watch the sunlight filter through the trees, and she allowed herself to enjoy the simple pleasures of her apartment: her tea, her books, the quiet moments before sleep without feeling guilty or anxious. These changes were subtle, almost imperceptible at first, but they built upon each other, creating a quiet momentum that began to reshape her life. One evening, Apache suggested a small challenge. He invited her to join him for a short meditation on the roof of the building. Maya hesitated, unsure if she was ready to expose herself so openly, even in a place that felt safe. But Apache's gentle encouragement, combined with her growing curiosity, convinced her to say yes. They sat together, eyes closed, listening to the city around them, the distant sounds of traffic, the rustle of leaves, the occasional bark of a dog. For the first time, Maya allowed herself to simply be present without planning, worrying, or hiding. The experience was transformative in its simplicity. She felt a sense of calm and clarity she hadn't known in years. For a brief moment, the walls she had built inside herself seemed to dissolve, leaving space for awareness, acceptance, and peace. Apache's presence was steady, grounding, and non-intrusive. He didn't direct her experience. He simply shared it with her, offering the gift of companionship without demands. Over time, Maya's habits began to shift in more tangible ways. She no longer instinctively turned her back to the room when she went to bed. She still faced the wall sometimes, but it no longer felt like a shield or a barrier. Instead, it was part of her space, a familiar boundary she could retreat to if needed, but not one that defined her life. She started to notice moments of beauty and connection in places she had once ignored. The way sunlight fell across the floor in the morning, the laughter of children in the courtyard, the quiet smiles exchanged with neighbors she had previously avoided. Maya also found herself laughing more easily, even at small things. Apache had a way of finding humor in ordinary situations, and she discovered that sharing a laugh with someone else could be comforting in a way she hadn't experienced for years. It wasn't forced or performative. It was natural, arising from genuine connection and understanding. These moments, though small, felt monumental to her. They were proof that life could be experienced fully, even after long periods of withdrawal and isolation. The relationship between Maya and Apache continued to deepen, though always within the boundaries she was comfortable with. He didn't push her to reveal more than she wanted, and she didn't feel pressured to change faster than she was ready for. This balance allowed her to explore her own emotional growth at her own pace. She began to recognize that courage wasn't about instant transformation. It was about patience, persistence, and willingness to engage, even in small ways. By the end of this period, Maya had undergone a subtle but profound shift. She still valued her solitude, still needed moments of quiet, and still occasionally faced the wall when sleeping. But she also recognized that life could offer connection, understanding, and joy, even in unexpected ways. Apache's influence was not overwhelming or domineering. It was gentle, consistent, and transformative. Through his presence, Maya began to understand that true growth often comes from small, consistent acts of engagement, reflection, and openness. And as she lay in bed one night, for the first time truly reflecting on the past few weeks, she felt a sense of quiet gratitude. The world outside her apartment was no longer something to fear or avoid. It was something to explore, appreciate, and engage with, even in the simplest ways. Maya realized that she was beginning to reclaim her life, not through grand gestures or dramatic changes, but through quiet awareness, gentle connection, and the courage to face each day with curiosity and openness. Life for Maya had begun to shift in ways she hadn't imagined possible. Her days were no longer filled solely with routine. Small moments of connection and reflection now wove their way into her life. Yet, despite these subtle changes, there were times when the weight of the past returned with quiet intensity. The memories of heartbreak and betrayal, long suppressed, occasionally surfaced, reminding her that vulnerability was not without risk. She had started to feel more open, yet fear still lingered, a shadow that sometimes stretched across her days and nights. One rainy afternoon, as Maya returned home from work, she found Apache sitting on the steps outside the building, watching the drops run down the pavement. He greeted her with his usual calm smile. "The city feels different in the rain, doesn't it?" he said softly. She nodded, appreciating his observation. The rain often reminded her of past sadness, yet his presence made it easier to see beauty in it. As they entered the building together, Apache suggested they take a few minutes in the courtyard, where a small cluster of plants had survived the downpour. Maya hesitated, glancing at the wet benches, but something in Apache's quiet encouragement drew her forward. She knelt beside him, brushing raindrops from the leaves, and noticed the way he approached the world, with care, patience, and an awareness that even small things mattered. Over the next several days, Apache encouraged Maya to engage in small, meaningful activities that brought her out of her usual routine. He asked her to help him organize a small book exchange for the building, to notice the patterns of daily life that often went unrecognized, and to take short walks with him in areas she had never explored. Each activity was simple, but collectively they began to pull her out of her self-imposed isolation. During one of these walks, Apache spoke gently about courage. "It isn't always loud or dramatic," he said. "Sometimes courage is simply showing up, noticing life, and choosing to engage even when it's hard." Maya listened, realizing how rarely she had allowed herself to be truly present in her own life. For years, she had hidden behind routines and walls, avoiding the discomfort of human connection. Now, slowly, she was beginning to understand that courage could be gentle, quiet, and consistent. Despite her progress, there were still nights when fear and doubt crept in. One evening, after a long day at work, Maya returned home and sat in her apartment, staring at the wall she had slept facing for years. The habit was comforting, a familiar anchor in a life that still felt fragile. Yet she felt a growing desire to change, to allow herself to turn toward the room, toward life, even if only for a moment. The thought terrified her, but it also carried a strange sense of possibility. Apache noticed her hesitation and offered a suggestion. "Why don't we try something small tonight? Just a little step, nothing more. You don't have to do anything you're not ready for, but sometimes small steps can change everything." His words were gentle, yet firm enough to make her consider them seriously. Maya nodded slowly, realizing that she was ready in a small way to confront her fear of vulnerability. That night they climbed to the roof together. The city stretched out beneath them, a tapestry of lights, sounds, and movement. Apache guided her to a corner where the wind was calm and the view expansive. For the first time, Maya allowed herself to sit fully upright, facing the city instead of retreating behind herself. The experience was both exhilarating and frightening. She felt exposed, yet strangely free. The vastness of the world no longer seemed threatening. It felt like an invitation. As they sat together, Apache encouraged her to speak, to share a thought, a feeling, or even a fear. Maya hesitated, then spoke quietly about the loneliness she had felt for years, about the habit of turning her back on the world as a way to protect herself. Apache listened without interruption, nodding gently. "Acknowledging it is the first step," he said. "You don't have to fight it all at once, but noticing it is important." The following days brought a mixture of excitement and uncertainty. Maya found herself thinking more often about the people around her, about the world outside her apartment, and about the small joys she had neglected for so long. Yet, with these thoughts came moments of doubt. Would she ever fully let go of the fear that had defined so much of her life? Could she truly engage with others without retreating into herself? Apache continued to support her gently, offering guidance without pressure. He suggested small challenges that encouraged her to step slightly beyond her comfort zone. One day, he asked her to join him in helping a neighbor carry groceries. Another day to participate in a casual game in the courtyard with children she had previously ignored. Each activity was small, seemingly insignificant, yet together they created a pattern of engagement and growth. During one particular evening, as they sat on the rooftop watching the sunset, Maya felt a profound shift within herself. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the city below hummed quietly. She realized that she no longer felt the same compulsion to retreat from life. The walls she had built around herself were still there, but they were no longer insurmountable barriers. They were boundaries she could navigate, not cages that defined her existence. Apache spoke softly, almost to himself. "The world is vast and life can be unpredictable, but even in its unpredictability, there's beauty and connection if you allow it." Maya absorbed his words, recognizing the truth in them. For so long, she had equated safety with isolation, believing that avoiding people and experiences would protect her. Now, she was learning that life's true safety lay in connection, understanding, and the courage to face discomfort with awareness. One night after a particularly reflective day, Maya found herself lying in bed, facing the wall as she had always done. Yet, something was different. She noticed the subtle changes in herself, the small steps she had taken, the moments of connection she had allowed, the courage to engage even when it was uncomfortable. The wall no longer felt like a prison. It was simply part of the room, a familiar presence in a life that was slowly opening to possibilities. The transformation wasn't complete, and Maya knew it wouldn't happen overnight. There were still days when fear and doubt resurfaced, when the instinct to retreat was strong. But now she had tools, awareness, and support. Apache had shown her that growth was not about instant change, but about consistent, gentle steps forward. Each small action, each moment of engagement, contributed to a broader shift in her life and perspective. Gradually, Maya began to embrace the idea that life could be both safe and full of connection. She allowed herself to notice beauty in ordinary moments, to engage with people in small, meaningful ways, and to experience joy without fear of loss or judgment. The habit of turning her back on the world, once a symbol of fear and withdrawal, had lost its absolute hold over her. She was learning to navigate life with awareness, courage, and openness. Apache remained a steady presence, guiding her without imposing, encouraging her without pressuring. Their interactions were filled with quiet wisdom, small challenges, and moments of shared observation. Through his guidance, Maya began to internalize lessons that extended beyond their relationship, lessons about patience, courage, presence, and the subtle power of connection. By the end of this period, Maya had undergone a significant, if gradual, transformation. She still valued her solitude, still needed moments of reflection, but she no longer feared engagement. The city, once overwhelming and indifferent, now felt alive with possibility. Her apartment, once a sanctuary of retreat, now felt like a place of potential, where connection and growth could flourish. And as she lay in bed one night, facing the wall, she realized that she had changed in ways both small and profound. The wall was no longer a shield but a part of her environment, a space from which she could step forward when ready. For the first time, she felt a quiet confidence in her ability to face life, to engage with the world, and to navigate both fear and joy with awareness. The lessons she had learned from Apache were not dramatic or immediate. They were quiet, subtle, and persistent. They had taught her that growth was possible, even after years of withdrawal and isolation. And while she still occasionally faced moments of doubt, she now approached them with curiosity rather than fear, recognizing that each step forward, no matter how small, was meaningful. Maya's journey was far from complete, but she had crossed an important threshold. She had begun to reclaim her life, one gentle, mindful step at a time, guided by patience, reflection, and the presence of someone who believed in the quiet power of connection. And in that reclamation, she discovered not just courage but the possibility of joy, the beauty of ordinary life, and the quiet, transformative power of trust. Maya had come a long way since the days when she slept facing the wall, seeking distance from the world and from herself. Each small step she had taken over the past weeks had gradually reshaped her life, and now she felt a quiet sense of confidence she had never known before. The routines of isolation were loosening their grip, replaced by curiosity, engagement, and a growing willingness to face life with openness. She still valued her personal space, but the walls that once confined her emotions no longer controlled her. It was a bright Saturday morning when Maya realized she was looking forward to her day with anticipation instead of dread. The city outside was alive with movement, sunlight spilling across streets and sidewalks, children laughing and neighbors greeting one another. In the past, such scenes might have made her feel invisible or excluded, but now she noticed the world with interest, even excitement. Life felt participatory, not observational. She had planned a simple morning, a walk to the nearby park, a stop at a small cafe, and perhaps some time spent reading by the riverside. It was ordinary, yet ordinary felt extraordinary because it was hers to experience fully, rather than from behind the safety of her apartment walls. As she stepped out, she felt a gentle thrill, the kind of excitement that comes from reclaiming space in the world that one had long avoided. On her way, she saw Apache tending to the courtyard plants, as he often did. He waved, and this time Maya waved back without hesitation, smiling naturally. Their eyes met, and for a moment she felt a quiet acknowledgement of the journey they had shared, the small steps, the conversations, the moments of reflection and learning. It was a connection built not on obligation, but on mutual presence and understanding. Maya walked through the park, noticing the patterns of light through the trees, the soft rustle of leaves in the morning breeze, and the distant sound of birdsong. These were things she had observed before, but now she saw them with awareness and appreciation rather than as background to her own isolation. A small group of children were playing nearby, and she found herself smiling at their laughter, feeling warmth instead of envy or detachment. It was a small but meaningful shift, a sign of how much her inner world had begun to open. After the park, she stopped at the cafe she had avoided for months. Previously, the crowded space and the chatter would have made her uncomfortable, but today it felt different. She ordered her coffee, found a quiet corner, and allowed herself to enjoy the simple act of being among people without retreating. When someone smiled at her briefly, she returned the gesture naturally, without hesitation. The interactions were small, yet they carried enormous significance for her. Later, she wandered to the riverside, finding a bench bathed in sunlight. She sat, pulled out a book, and let herself be fully present in the moment. The pages of the book were familiar, yet the act of reading felt different now. She noticed the sounds around her, the water flowing, the distant chatter, the occasional breeze carrying the scent of flowers, and she felt grounded in a way she hadn't before. Life was no longer something to observe from the edges, it was something to inhabit moment by moment. That evening, she returned home, feeling a sense of fulfillment she had rarely experienced. Apache was waiting for her on the rooftop, as he often did at sunset. "You look different today," he said softly, a hint of warmth in his tone. Maya smiled, feeling that she understood what he meant. She had shifted subtly but profoundly, not in dramatic gestures, but in the quiet courage to engage with life fully. They sat together, watching the sun dip below the city skyline. Maya noticed that she was no longer instinctively facing away from the room in her own apartment, no longer retreating from connection. The walls of her apartment, once a symbol of isolation, were now simply part of the space she inhabited. She could move through her life without fear, knowing that solitude and connection could coexist. Apache spoke gently about growth. "It's not about changing who you are," he said. "It's about letting yourself be fully present to notice, to engage, and to respond. Courage is in the small choices you make every day." Maya absorbed his words, realizing how much she had internalized their lessons. Her growth had been gradual, steady, and self-directed, guided by presence rather than pressure. In the following weeks, Maya's life continued to expand. She began to reach out to neighbors she had previously avoided, offering help or simply sharing a smile. She joined a small local community group for weekly walks and discussions, discovering that engaging with others could be enriching rather than threatening. Each interaction, though small, reinforced her belief in connection and trust. Maya also explored her own passions, taking time to sketch in her apartment, practice mindfulness exercises, and even experiment with new hobbies. These activities, once neglected, now became sources of joy and self-expression. She noticed that the city, which had once felt overwhelming and impersonal, was now a canvas for experience and discovery. The routine of life, while familiar, no longer felt constraining. It was filled with opportunities for engagement and reflection. One evening, as she prepared for bed, she paused to reflect on the journey she had undertaken. Sleeping facing the wall had been her way of shielding herself from the world, a habit born from fear and past pain. But now, she no longer needed that shield in the same way. She could sleep facing the room, aware of her surroundings, connected to her own presence, and open to possibilities. The wall was still there, but it was no longer a barrier. It was part of the space she had learned to inhabit fully. Maya realized that her transformation was not about becoming someone new. It was about reclaiming herself, discovering the strength and courage that had always existed within her. Apache's guidance had been invaluable, but the growth had been her own. Each choice she had made to engage, to observe, and a step beyond fear had built the foundation for her renewed life. The next morning she woke up, not facing the wall. She stretched, feeling a sense of freedom and peace. The room was the same, yet her perception of it had changed entirely. The sunlight streaming through the window felt warmer, the space felt larger, and the world beyond her apartment seemed more inviting. Maya smiled, acknowledging the quiet power of the small, steady steps she had taken. Throughout the days that followed, she continued to explore her city and her life with curiosity and awareness. She noticed the subtle rhythms of human behavior, the kindness of strangers, the beauty in ordinary moments. Each day became an opportunity to engage fully, to participate in life, and to nurture her own growth. The fear that had once defined her choices had softened, replaced by cautious confidence and a willingness to embrace uncertainty. Apache remained a constant presence, though their interactions were no longer the primary focus of her life. He was a guide, a companion, and a witness to her journey, reminding her that connection, patience, and gentle courage could shape a meaningful life. Their relationship had become one of mutual respect and quiet understanding, built on shared experiences and trust. Maya also began to reflect on her past with new perspective. The heartbreak, the isolation, and the fear were no longer chains, but lessons that had shaped her resilience and awareness. She could acknowledge the pain without allowing it to dictate her future. Instead, she embraced the possibilities that lay before her, knowing that her choices could create a life filled with connection, purpose, and joy. As weeks turned into months, Maya's transformation became more apparent to those around her. Neighbors noticed her smile, her willingness to engage, and the subtle warmth she carried in her presence. Colleagues observed her confidence, her openness to collaboration, and her ability to navigate challenges with calm awareness. Even the city itself seemed less intimidating and more inviting, reflecting the shift that had occurred within her. One evening, as she sat on the rooftop with Apache, watching the city lights flicker to life, she felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had come a long way from the girl who had hidden from the world, sleeping facing the wall in quiet isolation. She had discovered that life could be lived fully, even with vulnerability and uncertainty. She had learned that courage was not about dramatic gestures, but about small, consistent acts of engagement, presence, and reflection. Maya realized that her journey was ongoing, that growth was a lifelong process, and that each day offered opportunities for learning, connection, and self-discovery. She was no longer defined by fear or isolation. She was defined by her willingness to face life with awareness, curiosity, and openness. The city, the apartment, the people around her, all of it had become part of a life she could inhabit fully, rather than merely observe from a distance. As night fell, she prepared for bed, feeling a sense of peace that had eluded her for years. She lay down without instinctively turning toward the wall, her body relaxed, her mind calm. The room was familiar, yet it now felt expansive, filled with possibilities rather than limitations. She closed her eyes, knowing that she had reclaimed not just her space but her life, one gentle, mindful step at a time. Maya's story was one of quiet transformation, of small acts of courage, and of the profound impact of connection and guidance. Apache had been the catalyst, but the true change had come from within her, her willingness to notice, to engage, and to embrace life fully. And as she drifted into sleep, she felt a sense of contentment and readiness for whatever the future might hold. The girl who once sought distance from the world had learned that life was richer, more beautiful, and more meaningful when faced with openness, courage, and connection. And in that realization, she found not only peace but the quiet, enduring joy of living fully.